"You don't belong here." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, loud enough that the guy near the water fountain looked up, loud enough that two women on the treadmills slowed their pace to listen. Marisol Tate didn't flinch. She set her bag down on the bench, unzipped it, and pulled out her lifting gloves like the man hadn't said a word. That was a Tuesday morning in March. And what happened next changed everything about CrossFit Irongate, and about the three men who thought they ran it. Irongate Fitness sat on the corner of Brennan and Fifth in a mid-sized Ohio city that prided itself on being tougher than it looked. The gym had been around for 11 years. It had a reputation. Competitive athletes trained there. Former college football players, a few local cops, men who measured their worth in back squat numbers and how many guys they could outlift on any given morning. The culture, if you could call it that, had been set a long time ago by three men who came as a package deal. Bryce Hollingworth was 34, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no. Derek Saunders was 31, quieter, but the type who laughs at everything, the loudest, Guy says. And then there was Tuck. Nobody called him by his full name, Tucker Raines, unless they were filling out paperwork, who at 29 had decided that CrossFit was his personality, his religion, and his right to judge other people. These three had been training together at Irongate for 6 years. They showed up at 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, and by the time other members arrived, they had already established that this was their space, their rack, their corner, their gym. When the owner, a tired but decent man named Gerald Fowler, told them a new coach was starting in March, they didn't think much of it. Coaches came and went. As long as nobody messed with the morning programming, they didn't care. What Gerald didn't tell them, because he didn't think it mattered, and honestly, because he thought it might be good for the room, was that the new coach was a 31-year-old black woman named Marisol Tate. Marisol had grown up in Cincinnati, the middle child in a family where discipline wasn't a parenting style, it was a survival skill. Her mother worked nights at a hospital. Her father had done 2 tours in Iraq before coming home quieter than he left. From him, she'd learned that you don't talk about what you've done. You let it speak for itself. She'd enlisted in the Army at 19, combat medic. Then, because she was exactly the kind of person who runs toward the harder thing, she'd gone on to become part of a female engagement team attached to special operations units in Afghanistan. 3 deployments, things she doesn't talk about at parties, things that rewired the way she moves through a room, always aware of every exit, always reading every person before they've said a single word. After she came home, she threw herself into strength and conditioning. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it wasn't not therapy either. She got certified as a CrossFit coach, then as a strength and conditioning specialist, then as an Olympic lifting instructor. She'd spent 4 years coaching at a gym in Columbus before a family situation. Her mother's health brought her back closer to home. Gerald Fowler had found her through a mutual contact. He'd interviewed her on a Wednesday, offered her the job on Thursday, and asked her to start the following Tuesday. He didn't think to mention Bryce, Derek, and Tuck. Marisol arrived at 5:45 that first morning, 15 minutes before the 6 o'clock class. She wore dark training pants, a plain gray t-shirt, and her hair pulled back. She wasn't trying to make an impression. She was just early, the way she always was. Bryce was already there. So were Derek and Tuck. Tuck clocked her the moment she walked in. He looked at Derek. Derek looked at Bryce. Something passed between them. That particular kind of silent communication that men in groups develop when they've spent too long deciding together who belongs and who doesn't. Marisol introduced herself to the front desk staff, got her access sorted, and started reviewing the whiteboard for the morning's workout. She wasn't coaching this first session. She was observing, getting a feel for the class structure. That's when Tuck walked over. "You're the new coach?" he said. Not a question, really, more like a verdict he was about to overturn. She looked up. "That's right," Marisol said. He didn't offer his name. "What's your background?" "Army. Then coaching, 4 years in Columbus before this." Tuck smiled. It was the kind of smile you don't trust. "Army, huh? Like admin? Supply chain?" She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. "Combat medic. 3 deployments." He made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a dismissal, but somewhere in between. Then he turned back to his guys and said something she couldn't hear. All 3 of them laughed. She went back to the whiteboard. The 6 o'clock class had 17 people. Marisol watched quietly from the side while the outgoing coach, a young guy named Paul who was moving to Denver, ran the session. She took notes. She watched how people moved, who struggled with their knees on squats, who was compensating for an old shoulder injury. She was building a mental file on every person in that room. Tuck, she noted, had a significant anterior pelvic tilt that was going to wreck his lower back within 2 years if he kept deadlifting the way he was. His form was technically impressive to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. She knew what she was looking at. Bryce had good raw strength but 0 flexibility. He was moving weight he had no business moving with a range of motion that's shallow. Derek was the best of the 3 technically, but he was clearly chasing the other 2's numbers instead of his own, which meant he was consistently pushing beyond what his body could safely handle. None of this was her business yet. She was observing. After the class, while people filtered out, Tuck came over again. This time Bryce was with him. "So what's your total?" Bryce asked. He meant her combined Olympic lifts, snatch and clean and jerk. It was a flex question, designed to make her justify herself. "I don't really lead with numbers," she said. "Why not?" Tuck said. "Because they're not impressive. Because they're not the point." She capped her marker, set it down. "The point is whether I can coach. Numbers don't tell you that." "At this gym," Bryce said, "numbers tell you everything." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her notebook and walked to the other side of the gym to talk to Paul about transition logistics. She heard Tuck say, behind her, Gerald hired a diversity hire. She kept walking. This went on for 2 weeks. Every morning she was there, they were there. Little comments, small tests, the kind of low-level harassment that's designed to be deniable, never quite bad enough to report, never quite direct enough to confront cleanly. Tuck called her coach in a tone that made the word sound like a joke. Bryce kept asking her questions about programming in front of the class, trying to catch her out. Derek laughed. Other members noticed. A few of them started watching with that uncomfortable look people get when they know something's wrong and don't know whether to say something or not. One of the morning regulars, a woman in her 40s named Suzanne, who had been coming to Irongate for 7 years, pulled Marisol aside after class one Friday. "You know they're trying to get you to quit," Suzanne said. "I know. Are you going to?" Marisol looked at her. Not a chance. What the 3 men didn't know, what they had decided, wasn't worth finding out. Was anything real about who Marisol Tate was? They had looked at her and made a calculation. Female, black, new. Therefore, less than. It was a fast calculation and a confident one, and it was wrong in every single direction. She hadn't mentioned the FEA work because she'd learned long ago that it rarely landed the way it should. She hadn't mentioned that in her second deployment, she had been ambushed with a 4-person team and had been the person who kept the others alive until extraction. A story that quietly earned her a commendation that almost nobody outside the Army knew about. She hadn't mentioned that in Columbus, she'd trained 3 athletes who had gone on to compete at the national level. She hadn't mentioned any of it because she didn't think she should have to. On the last Friday of March, Gerald pulled Marisol into his office before the morning class. He looked tired. He sat down, rubbed his face. "I've been getting complaints," he said. She waited. "From Bryce Hollingworth. He's been a member here for 6 years. He says you're dismissive of the experienced athletes." that you're trying to change things too fast. She nodded slowly. Have you noticed any changes I've made that you think are wrong? He paused. No. Honestly, the class feedback has been great. Suzanne said last week's mobility programming was the best she'd seen here. So, what are you going to do? Gerald looked uncomfortable. I'm not going to do anything, yet. I just wanted you to know it was happening. She thanked him and went out to run the 6 o'clock class. That day, the workout included heavy deadlifts. Tuck loaded the bar up to 315, well beyond what the programming called for, and started pulling loudly in front of the class. It was a performance. It was a message. Your programming doesn't apply to me. Marisol walked over. Load it down to the prescribed weight, or I'll ask you to sit this one out. The room went very quiet. Tuck straightened up. He was 6'2". He looked down at her. She was 5'6", and he smiled that smile. And if I don't, then you're done in this class for the day. Gerald's not going to like that. Gerald hired me to coach. You're welcome to talk to him after class. Tuck looked at Bryce, a long look. Then he looked back at Marisol. Fine. He pulled 2 plates, slowly, still performing. But he did it. After class, he did go to Gerald. Gerald called Marisol in. And for the first time, Gerald sat across from all 4 of them and said clearly that Marisol's programming authority was not up for debate. Tuck didn't say much, but something had shifted in him. She could see it. She'd seen it before. That particular recalibration of a certain kind of man when something doesn't go the way he expected. The next week, Tuck started talking to other members. She couldn't hear the conversations, but she could read them. He was trying to build something. A coalition, a complaint, a case. He was recruiting. What he didn't know was that Suzanne had been watching him do this and had started telling other members a different story. The story of what she'd actually seen in 4 weeks of Marisol's classes. The improvements, the culture. The fact that for the first time, the women in the morning class weren't made to feel like they were in the way. On a Wednesday in April, a man showed up to the 6 o'clock class that Marisol hadn't seen before. He signed in as a drop-in. His name on the waiver was Philip Grass. He was tall, gray at the temples, maybe 55. He moved like someone who'd been training for 30 years because he had been. He didn't say much. He did the workout. He moved well. He left without talking to anyone. Marisol thought nothing of it. 2 days later, Gerald called her into his office again. His face was different this time, tighter. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a social media post from Tuck's account. Posted 4 days ago, it had a photo taken inside the gym which violated member policy of Marisol coaching a group of members. The caption said, "When the new coach learned her deadlift form from a YouTube tutorial. Some of us worked for years for this. Affirmative action in action." It had 47 likes. Marisol read it twice. She set it back on the desk. Gerald said, "I should have handled this sooner. I'm sorry. What are you going to do now?" "I'm terminating his membership. Today. Derek and Bryce will get warnings, if there's any further." "That's not all," Marisol said. Gerald looked at her. "He took an unauthorized photo inside this gym and posted it publicly. That's a policy violation and a potential liability. Your lawyer should know about it." Gerald nodded slowly. He hadn't thought about it that way. He was thinking about it now. The same afternoon, Marisol went to the bench near the entrance where Tuck always left his bag, and she waited. She knew his schedule. He came in at 5:15 most days, even on the days he wasn't taking a class, to use the equipment. He walked in at 5:18. He saw her immediately. He didn't slow down. He walked toward her with the easy confidence of a man who had decided he was in charge of this situation. "Tuck," she said. He stopped. "Coach," still making it sound like a punchline. "You need to gather your things. Gerald is ending your membership today." Something moved across his face. "What?" "The photo, the post. Gerald's going to walk you through it. He's in his office." Tuck stared at her. "You got me kicked out. You took an unauthorized photo of me and posted it with a caption questioning my qualifications based on my race." You did that. He laughed, not the easy laugh from before. Something harder now. You can't prove that's what that was. You don't need to prove intent for a policy violation. The photo is the policy violation. Everything else is just context. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, so only she could hear, "You know what? I looked you up. There's no record of you in any special operations unit. I think you made that up to sound more impressive." She looked at him. "I was attached to special operations units as a medic. I was never in one, and I didn't mention that to you. You're mad about something else." He had nothing to say to that. She could see him trying to find a foothold. "Gerald's office," she said again, and walked back to the floor. What Marisol didn't tell him was that Philip Grass, the drop-in from Wednesday, was a former Army colonel and a close personal friend of Gerald's. Someone Gerald had called quietly when the situation started escalating. Philip had come to observe. He had watched the 6 o'clock class. He had watched how Marisol coached, how she moved, how she handled a room. And afterward he had told Gerald 2 things: that she was one of the most technically skilled coaches he'd seen in a civilian gym, and that what was being done to her was something he recognized. He'd seen it done to women in his units. He knew what it looked like. Philip had made 2 phone calls after that. One was to a contact at the local veterans organization. The other was to a journalist he trusted who covered community stories. He didn't tell Marisol any of this. He didn't think it was his story to tell. Tuck's membership was terminated that evening. Bryce received a formal written warning and a suspension from morning classes for 30 days. Derek came to Marisol privately the following morning before anyone else arrived and said, quietly, that he was sorry. She thanked him and let him take the class. It might have ended there, but Tuck, it turned out, was not done. On the Friday after his termination, a post appeared on a local community Facebook group. It was from a fake account, traced later, but that part comes in a moment, claiming that Irongate Fitness had a pattern of discriminatory hiring and that the new coach had falsified her military credentials. The post didn't use Marisol's name, but it described her in terms specific enough that anyone who knew the gym would know who it was. It got shared 41 times in 6 hours. Marisol found out about it from Suzanne, who texted her at 8 in the morning with a screenshot. She sat with it for a while. Then she made a call she hadn't planned to make for a long time, to a woman named Captain Diane Holloway, her former commanding officer, now retired. "I need you to write something," Marisol said. Captain Holloway said, "Tell me what happened." Captain Holloway wrote a letter. It was 2 pages. It detailed Marisol's service record. Not the classified parts, but the facts that were in the public record. 3 deployments, her commendation, her work with the female engagement team, her evaluation scores, her character. Gerald's lawyer sent a cease and desist to the fake account and filed for identification of the account holder through the platform. Within 72 hours, the account was linked to a proxy email registered through a device that had logged into Tuck's verified account 3 days earlier. Tucker Raines, it emerged during this process, had also listed on his own social media profile that he had served in the Marine Corps from 2013 to 2017. Gerald's lawyer, now fully engaged, ran that claim. There was no record, no DD-214, no service record at all. He had never served. He had, for years, collected the social credibility of military service without ever having done a single day of it. The journalist Philip had called, published a piece 2 weeks later in the local paper. It wasn't sensational. It was careful and factual. A fitness coach, a veteran, targeted by harassment at her workplace. A fake social media account, later traced. A fabricated military record. A letter from a retired Army captain. The gym's response, the outcome. It was picked up by a regional news outlet the following Monday. The veterans organization Philip had contacted put out a statement. Tuck hired a lawyer. His lawyer sent a letter to the paper. The paper's lawyer responded. Nothing came of Tuck's letter. Marisol gave one interview. She sat across from the journalist, its woman, mid-30s, careful with her questions, and said what she wanted to say. I didn't come to that gym to prove anything to anyone. I came to do a job. When people tried to make that impossible, I did what I was trained to do. I kept working. I stayed in my lane. I let the outcome speak. The journalist asked whether she was angry. Marisol was quiet for a moment. I don't carry it like anger. I carry it more like data. It tells me things I already knew about how the world works. What matters is what you do with that information. The journalist asked whether she felt like she'd won. I don't think about it that way. I think about the 6 o'clock class. I think about Suzanne's squat depth improving by about 15 degrees in 6 weeks. I think about the woman who came up to me last Tuesday and said she'd never felt comfortable in a weight room until now. She paused. That's what I showed up to do. At Irongate, the 6 o'clock class grew. In April, it had 17 people. In May, it had 23. By June, Gerald had added a second morning slot and asked Marisol if she wanted to take on a third class per week. She said yes. Bryce came back after his 30-day suspension. He was quieter. He trained hard. He didn't give her trouble. After about a month, he came to her before class and asked a genuine question about his squat mechanics. She answered it. That was the beginning of something closer to professional respect than she'd expected from him. Derek became, in a strange way, one of her more dedicated students. He had good instincts, and without Tuck calibrating his behavior, he turned out to be a decent person who had been running with the wrong current for too long. Tuck did not come back. The fake account post was removed. The regional coverage died down, the way news does. But the letter from Captain Holloway and the court documentation of the traced account sat in Gerald's files. His lawyer had made sure of that. There is a thing that happens sometimes in gyms and boardrooms and classrooms and every other place where people have decided without thinking about it that certain people don't belong there. Someone shows up. They do the work. They don't explain themselves or perform or beg for space. And slowly, or sometimes suddenly, the room reorganizes itself around the reality of what it's actually looking at. Marisol didn't restructure the morning culture through confrontation. She did it by coaching well, by knowing the names of every person in her classes within the first week, by catching Derek's knee-tracking issue before it became an injury, by building a 6:30 Friday slot specifically for women who had told her they didn't feel comfortable training around the morning crowd, and filling it within 3 weeks to the point where they had to cap enrollment. She did it by showing up at 5:45 every morning and doing exactly the job she was hired to do. The morning of the article's regional pickup, Gerald texted her, "You okay?" She texted back. 5:45, same as always. He texted, "I'll have coffee ready." That was the whole conversation. But if you knew how Gerald communicated, terse, a little awkward, uncomfortable with sentiment, you'd know what it meant. Captain Diane Holloway flew out in June and took Marisol's Saturday class. Afterward, they got lunch at a diner 3 blocks from the gym. Holloway ate a turkey club and told Marisol she had good people in that room. "I know," Marisol said. "You built that. They were already there. I just made space." Holloway looked at her for a second. That's what good leadership is. The last piece of this story, and it's the part that doesn't make the news, that no journalist writes about because it doesn't have a clean headline, is what happened with the women's Friday 6:30 class. In September, 6 months after Marisol had started at Irongate, that class elected a class captain. It was an informal thing, Marisol's idea, to give people ownership over the culture they were building together. The class voted. The person they chose was a woman named Renata, 42, who'd walked into the gym in April barely able to do a bodyweight squat. Renata had told Marisol in that first week that she'd tried gyms before and always quit, that she'd felt invisible, or worse, watched, that she'd never found a place that felt like it was for her. She hadn't missed a Friday class since April. When they told Marisol that Renata was the pick, Marisol just nodded. She said, Good choice. And she meant it. That's the outcome no one measures. Not in weight lifted, or classes taken, or articles published. Just a 42-year-old woman who found a room that was finally hers, and a former Army medic who made sure it stayed that way. The mats got rolled up after the last class on a Saturday night in September. The lights came down. The gym went quiet the way gyms do, all that effort and impressed into stillness. Marisol locked up, walked to her car, and drove home the same way she always did. Some things don't need a finish line. They just need to keep going.